Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachel Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Well, there is nothing better than laughing and weeping with your friends, comrades, not only in arms, but in this wild process of engaging marriage. And so for Becky and I to be with dear friends and colleagues, Steve and Lisa Call, it is an honor to have you back to talk about the issues between the two of you. That's our primary point, is to talk through what goes on between the two of you when one of you gets triggered. And then Becky and I will listen, learn, because we don't want to talk about it.
We don't have any triggers.
Wait, I asked her before, what triggers do you have? She goes, I don't have any.
I don't have any triggers.
Yes, she does. Yeah, well, when you...
Thanks a lot, Steve. Yes, I do.
Then she turned to me, and what triggers do you have? And I said, let's just talk to Steve and Lisa.
Yeah, so, I'm sure yours will come up as well. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting us. It's a privilege to be a part of the playful conversation with you both.
Two dueling psychologists.
Well, and two sane women who somehow foolishly married them.
That's so true. We're trying. Yes.
Really.
Well, and what an honor to have you both after you just finished shooting your own online course on marriage, on your book. So to say for our audience, may you be soon aware of this great gift that will be out. But what a sweet, sweet work to have you be not only part of our online course, but to take your material and to invite people into it. So, and what the word triggered to me implies is that we can be going along doing fairly well, or so we think, and then all of a sudden we either fall into an abyss or erupt into an interaction that just seems isn't commensurate to what seems to have been going on before, during, and after. And those triggers, I think, really undermine a lot of people's marriage because they don't have language, they don't have a context to understand what might be provoking, and in many ways, they don't have a clue how to engage. So, triggers, Steve and Lisa.
Yeah, it was probably an hour ago where Lisa and I were sitting and having a conversation about some of what we maybe thought about bringing into this time with the both of you. And I was aware in that very moment that thematically, I think what happens for us sometimes is when one of us feels or believes that we are taking care of something on our own without the other, meaning where we are responsible for figuring something out that is meant to be something for the both of us. I think for us and for many couples, that's where significant amount of triggers occur when, wait, how come you're not helping me with this? Wait, isn't this your responsibility? I think whenever we have a sense of being alone in this journey, whatever it is, whether that's taking care of the car, whether it's watching over one of the children, whether that, whatever it could be, I think for us is where we get triggered often, is when there's a sense of we're in this, it feels like we're in this moment alone, which I think for most of us, that's the core fear we have anyway, is the fear of being left or being alone in whatever we are in.
Mm-hmm. And I think you were right on when you said that it's in a split second that it happens. And that's one of the hardest parts, because you're going along, things are fine, maybe you're even feeling really happy and connected, and then the slightest thing happens and all of a sudden everything's undone. And you're trying to figure out what just happened. And I was fine a minute ago and now I'm not fine, and all my emotions are going, and I'm not prepared for this, or I don't know why your emotions are all going, and I don't even know what's going on for you. So it's a very undoing kind of a situation where here we are, now what?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think in some regards it was easier when Dan was traveling a lot, because I pretty much knew I was on my own, and I was glad that he was earning a living. That was sort of like, this is working for us. But then during the time of COVID, where we have grandchildren and their parents over and no one's in the house, and I'm like the Energizer bunny inside and Dan's outside talking in a chair with the other adults in chairs. And I come out and there's not a chair for me. And I'm like, why doesn't he notice this? Because I'm bringing all the food out, So we're not beyond our triggers. Unfortunately, we still have them.
Well, and again, I think Steve is so right on. It's where we feel alone. And then I would go in terms of our relationship where I feel like I'm going to be found fault with being alone. And that
Absolutely.
is like, I'm going to be in the kitchen having to prepare pancakes while she's doing yoga.
Hey.
And I'm not doing it fast enough. And I hear this little voice from the yoga mat saying, did you get the, and it's like, if you want to help here, leave your mat and follow me out to bring those pancakes.
And let me say, this is the first time I ever did that with the COVID entertaining.
Oh, okay.
And then Dan was like a little irritable. And
no, a little.
You were a lot, but I'm like, I'm going to stay here on my mat because this is what I'm supposed to be learning. And I knew that he would come around, but that was a new experience for me this morning. Totally new.
But it is that sense of being alone and then being held responsible. I'm going to probably be at fault. And that sense of alone and critiqued, alone and shame. Yeah. I think for a lot of people, that's where we get taken and then taken
Absolutely.
out.
Yeah. I think what you just named for both of you is helpful. I think across the board is when there's any hint of judgment, when there's any hint of how come you're not doing and then fill in the blank, or how come you haven't done fill in the blank. What's wrong with you that you haven't? Any hint of judgment, I think that's, for us, I think that's a really significant trigger is I think most of us are hyper aware, hyper attuned, hyper vigilant almost to that of, oh, so you don't like the clothes I'm wearing? Oh, so you don't like the way my hair looks? Oh, so you don't like the meal I made? Oh, so you don't like the way I talk to the kids? Like there's just this, especially when we're spending more time together, that just naturally happens.
There is no escape.
But I had already done this 3 times with pancakes, so I felt like I had capital.
You did have capital, and it wasn't a problem. It just had that sense of, come join me even for a few moments. Don't go off to work out and to have you. It really was that sense of isolation. So that even just now helps a whole lot to be able to say, oh my gosh, if we can get better at anticipating, which is what a trigger doesn't allow. A trigger has that sense of it is in an instant and it's very hard to predict. But a category like what you just offered, I feel like gives a whole new scope to being able to go, oh, when I feel alone.
Wow.
And when there's a sense of judgment possible, those are going to be very, very significant moments to tend to, I know, my own wanting to make her pay at that point. So when you think about how your own past shapes your triggers, because we're talking universal right now. Anytime you're alone, usually most people feel that judgment. But how does each of your own backgrounds shape something of the trigger that you experience with one another?
Well, I don't know. I think understanding each other's background. So, just a couple hours ago when Steve was rushing around, panicking, like, panicking, making you feel like I should have done something different or whatever. And I think understanding his sense of, I always need to get it right. When I was, in my family, I needed to get it right. I'm the firstborn. And if I don't have it right, then something's going to go down. And so that sense, that urgency that he gets. And so I think for me to be able to hear that in his voice, to hear that in his, whatever's happening at the time and interpret it, reinterpret it. Because I think for years and years and years, it would be like totally put me on the defense. Like,
what's wrong with you?
What's wrong with what's going on? How come you're blaming me? And now that I understand a little bit more, not always, but sometimes I can understand a little bit more. Okay, this is where this is coming from for him. And I'm going to be a little bit more sensitive to not taking it personal. Like, okay, this isn't about me. This is about him, and he can run around and be upset. but I don't have to necessarily enter into it.
Mm-hmm. But that was also true for you, right? Like in terms of your story with you would lose relationship if you did something wrong.
Right. So maybe that's why I understand it for you too.
Yeah. I think that's true for both of us. Like that's such a common variable denominator for us is this not overwhelming fear, but it's present in the way in which we are, I think, attuned to the other being disappointed. Like if we don't do what we're supposed to do, quote unquote, then we lose relationship. That's our story. I mean, that's how we entered into marriage.
Right. We have our own personal judgment that's so strong that maybe we can relate to that in each other.
Sort of like if, not saying this would ever happen, but just like if Lisa used the word panicking.
Yeah, I don't, because then I'm doing something wrong. You know, like how dare you say that word? Because that can't be true. Because if I do something wrong, then Lisa's disappointed, and then that's the story. And I think for many of us, that's the core story: is we're terrified of doing something wrong because we potentially lose relationship. And I think for many of us, we're often not even aware of, oh, that's what's happening. Is I lose something of connection with you when I don't do what you hope for me to do.
And yet I've been with you in moments of panic. True?
Yes.
I'll just say, not that this would ever happen, but like the possibility of losing your wallet out in the deep, wild Montana countryside.
Yes. Or my reel one time.
Yeah.
Or
my
keys.
phone.
Or keys. Yeah, keys.
Keys.
Or 3 phones.
And you too, when you've lost your keys, when you've lost your reel.
For example.
We're talking about you.
Just hypothetically.
Wait a minute.
Oh,
We're talking about
the
you.
wives are very clued into this.
So there's something in that moment that has something to do with your past. It isn't just the issue that, oh my gosh, I think I've lost my keys or wallet or whatever.
No, it's I've done something wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And I think for me and for many of us, the core fear kicks in of, now we lose connection because there will be disappointment in me. So I think for many couples, and I think that's true for Lisa and I,
and I can admit that, yes, using the word panic is maybe my subtle way of saying how irritating it was. I see that you're panicked. You're freaking out.
So you were triggered by my panic. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, I'm just using that word. Is not what you would want to describe yourself as. So
okay.
And of course, Dan, picks up on that very
right. Well, and the fact is, it is relational, but there's also a sense of our identity is bound into this. And when there's this moment where I'm exposed not being as I think she should see me.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I know. I had already done the 3 other COVID visits with you working out for 2 or 3 hours. I knew. I think I need to stay on my mat, but that was really huge for me.
Huge. I mean, and I knew
because you knew he would be bothered.
No, I don't like him to be mad. So I really okay, I'll help.
Oh, yeah.
I'll help. We had a dog that would bark, and she would want to help, and I'm like, I like to help.
Right. But you knew that you needed to stay. Yeah, I knew that it was really good for her to stay.
That didn't change your behavior.
It took a while. But in that process, I think if I had put language to what we're now talking about, I feel alone. I feel judged. It's not going to work out. Whenever I'm in the kitchen, it just doesn't work out.
I know he's good at pancakes, though. We found a really expensive brand.
Found a brand that doesn't require a lot of labor. So all that to say, I know for me, the identity of if I screw up, there are going to be consequences of a meltdown that's more than just you, Becky. It's sort of like the world itself is going to melt down. And in that, I now have a whole new labor to do. I don't just have to do pancakes. I've got to figure out how to put the world back now that it's melted down. All that's happening.
That's your
It
family.
isn't conscious.
Okay.
It isn't intentional, but it's so reactive, reflexive. And that's what we're trying to put words to on behalf of you, listener. This process happens at a, for lack of a better word, at a unwitting, unconscious level. And it happens so quickly that it triggers then a process for how the two of you have largely handled conflict together in the past. Mm-hmm. For us, you would have normally stopped doing what you're doing and come and aided. I would have felt awful, but I also would have felt relieved. We would have been able to sort of like get by it. But again, the cost of you doing something so good, staying on the mat, took me a longer period of time. But when we were able to come back and I was able to bless her, not just working out, but actually not being bound at all to my irritation, it felt like we made another moment of good progress.
Yeah, really good.
That's good. That's good. That's really encouraging to hear, because it's in the simple everyday moments that maybe reshape, rewire, redo those kind of upsetness interactions. Maybe Lisa's upset about something or bothered about something, usually, and at times I might take that really personally, and Lisa does as well. But yet, how can we be aware that it's not as if there's something wrong with you? And I think that's the key with the trigger, is we often make that assumption. There's something wrong with me. That, again, that core theme of shame, judgment, when there's disappointment, when there's frustration, and that overriding fear can kick in, like, oh no, again, that panicky sense of, where are you? We can't have access.
Yeah, and his expression and his attitude took me back to a 30-year ago trip that I took with girlfriends. But I remember thinking, oh, he's going to come around. He's going to do this. But that's, again, the trigger where there's great fear, right? 3 decades of,
yes.
Oh, it's the same moment, Yeah.
Well, and as we're putting trigger. So it isn't that it's a single event. It cascades to the past. Right. It creates this structure between the two of us in that moment. So for a couple that has escalated multiple triggers into a kind of, it's almost like a bad accident. Yes. What's your sense of what happens for you two? What do you want for a couple to do as they engage? Maybe there are 5 or 6 trigger processes down the road in this condensed accident. What then? What do we do at that point?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what you just named is really helpful for us all to be aware of, is that the trigger is not just trigger past, but trigger past, trigger present, and the fear of the trigger in the future. Like they're all in one. And so part of, I think, what's really helpful, hard for us to do at times, but it's really helpful to be intentional about almost this intentional question of wondering what the other needs. Like, I wonder what you need. I wonder what might be helpful. Like, to be intentionally attuned, especially in moments of trauma trigger or shame trigger or conflict trigger, is that, again, kind of that right brain state of fear, and we're just so overwhelmed. We don't know what we need sometimes. So we're trying to be if we dare to believe we are created to be in the image of God for one another, being intentionally attuned, intentionally empathic toward our spouse, I think, can be really helpful.
I also think normalizing the fact that triggers they're just going to be there, that everybody's going to experience them and you can't avoid them. They happen. I think can also help mitigate a little bit of shame that might come up if you get triggered and you think, how did I find myself here? Mm-hmm. So I think now that we sense that, okay, this is just going to happen. And so when you're in the middle of a trigger or you're in the middle of something that you just think, how did I get here? If you can mitigate the shame so that you're not beating yourself up at the moment or judging yourself at the moment, you can see a little bit clearer to maybe think about the need, or maybe think, okay, maybe I don't need to be defensive right now because we're just here and it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, is the embrace of the trigger rather than the judgment toward the trigger. I think for both of us, on behalf of one another.
I don't know if I want to embrace it, but I know it's good. It's just going to happen.
Yeah.
And then there's no shame. Like, okay, we all have this, and it didn't mean we did something wrong. It just happened. It's going to happen.
think to really normalize
It's not
it
about
and
avoiding it.
validate it in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I'm getting better with that, with my defensiveness. I know that that's a big deal for me. And I love that with Dan. It's not. He's not a defensive man normally with me. I think it's beautiful. So to kind of not go to shame, but then just like we know that that's my story. That's where I go. And then to not hate myself for it. Like, I'm sorry I did it again, or just to see it and realize that's not what he's placing on me to go there.
Well, we were right before we did this podcast with you. We were watering flowers and
Together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, two different. Well, yeah.
Yeah. And she said, why don't you I have a hard time getting to this one bush. Will you take the sprinkling can and do that?
Watering can.
Sprinkling water.
You don't do this very often, Dan.
No, he doesn't. No, I've always tried to get him grounded with the garden.
It's quite an image to see Dan with this little sprinkling can.
Well, normally, I have the hose, the water's running. Normally someone puts it on the ground, right, on the patio.
Yeah.
He holds it in front of his chest. It just goes all over his shorts.
Well, that's a way to avoid watering in the future.
They're
thankfully,
dry-free shorts or whatever.
Thankfully, everything I own is for fly fishing. So they're shorts that will dry in about 2 seconds.
And I'm like, sorry, honey, but why don't you put the watering can on the patio?
That was the fascinating part was she feels awful, but she wants to be helpful, but it actually shifts to being blamed. Like, why didn't you put it down?
No, why don't you? Most people do that. I didn't blame him a little bit.
Yeah.
Were you bothered by that, Dan? Were you bothered?
Not at all. I thought it was hilarious. Like watching her water me and then feel bad about it, but then have to do something to mitigate her own sense of shame by making it my fault. I really thought it was hilarious.
Oh gosh, now you've turned it all on me.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty effective.
Becky got triggered.
I did. Like, he just never learned that. He didn't learn to put the watering can down.
Well, the sprinkling can. So
right.
I think so much has to do with this commitment of not being contempt bound with one another. At the moment of the interaction this morning, I was treating you poorly, and it just came to my soul like, you don't want to treat her with contempt right now. So I was able at least to back away from doing any more interaction at that point. But the ability to, in many ways, make fun of evil, to mock evil.
To mock evil. Yes.
Looks at death and says in 1 Corinthians 15 about 54, where he says, oh, death, where's your sting? That ability to look and laugh together at moments where you water me, then defend yourself by blaming me. And it's all funny. I'm glad to be able to go water in a way that would be of help. But those are the moments where if we can laugh, even over a few of those, I think we're in a far better place to be able then to engage the next round of it with that, in many ways, that brain having been wired now slightly different given that. But I think, again, what I'm going to walk away with is what you both brought up in the beginning, and that is when you feel alone.
Yeah.
And encumbered and in many ways judged, that's going to ring loud and clear as one really of those.
Good. Yeah.
So what would you say, Becky, helps you get out of the triggered process?
I think probably kindness is the first thing.
Absolutely.
Just not being so hard on myself. Just not hating myself for not being perfect. It being kind. I think that kindness, and then if it's between the two of us, I think we're gaining in trust and in kind laughter, which is huge. And I think we've loved each other, but I haven't always been kind to myself.
Yeah, and that's where the process is always going to have a kind of generic, this is true for us all.
Yes.
but it's also going to have enough unique specificity where there are things to be wrestled with regarding your own story, what you are, in one sense, prone to get triggered in. That has to be a part of the conversation of a good marriage to be better prepared to engage that together. So,
well, I think what you just named also is the sense of playfulness, especially when we are triggered, especially when evil is present. I think that's such a gift to one another. Is evil doesn't have that kind of power over you. I mean, again, the protection that we offer one another in moments where the other's triggered, to me, is what marriage is meant to be. Is this gift of protection.
Well, I know the next time we're in Montana, next time you lose something, I will not use the word panicking.
If you do, I might have to leave you stranded somewhere.
That would not be good, but I will at least be able to call Lisa and say, he did it again.
He did it again.
He didn't panic.
But
now I'm encouraged that you are sharing with us about your laughter, because I don't think we're quite to the laughter. I think I think it's such a process and such a journey, because we're just about to the part where we're not getting too defensive, you know? Yeah. And so I'm looking forward to when we're starting to laugh about it. That's going to be the next stage. So that'll be our goal. But it's really this continuum, right? You get past one and then you move to the next. And so I'm looking forward to more laughter.
Amen to that.
What an honor to be with you. And as well, for folks who partake of the online course, they'll get a chance to see, right? Well, yes, with the book Reconnect, but as well with both online courses, something of the work of what you have done on behalf of one another, but as well on our behalf. So we say again to you both, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a privilege. Yeah. Blessings.
We hope this episode has been helpful. And if you would like to engage your marriage in other ways than this podcast, we'd love to be an ally with you. And one of the ways we're doing so is inviting you to a marriage conference that Kathy Lurzell and I will be teaching on October 10th. It's to awaken your heart to the longings that existed in your relationship and are meant to grow through your relationship.
And also, there's a marriage online course that launches October 13th. I'm just so proud of you and the team, and all the work that went into this course will help you discover how your personal stories shape your marriage story and find hopeful pathways forward, meaning to become even more intimate and more loving and kinder to yourself and to your spouse, and therefore to your marriage.
And finally, we've got date nights, which I don't know if we've ever had a date night, but we are part of a date night series where we're going to invite couples to an experience of reflection on their marriage in a more playful and engaging way, where you get to celebrate your relationship in greater gratitude and play. And look, all of these can be purchased separately, or you can bundle them together and get the conference for free. So go to the AllenderCenter.org/marriage to find out more about all three of these offerings.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.